started writing, I was writing all sorts of op-eds back in 2004 in newspapers around the country. I was all over the internet writing about what the consequences were going to be of this reckless monetary policy. I said it was going to bankrupt our financial institutions, that real estate prices would collapse, that Freddie and Fannie would go under. I saw what was coming from a mile away. I eventually put my thoughts into a book called Crash Proof: How to Profit from the Coming Economic Collapse. It came out in February of 2007. And for 3 years, I was a fixture on financial television. I was on every week on CNBC, on Fox, on CNN, warning about what was going to happen. And not only did anybody listen to me, I mean, people were actually laughing at me when I made these forecasts because they didn't think it was even possible. But the reason I was able to accurately predict what happened to our economy is because I understood how government policy was distorting the market. I understood the dangers of the reckless monetary policy that we were pursuing. And the problem is, we're doing it worse now. And the crisis that's coming, and I've got the last two crises I figured out. I predicted the collapse of the NASDAQ and the bankruptcy of all the dot-coms. I got the housing bubble and the recession right. I'm pretty sure I got this next crisis coming right too, and that's going to be a much more severe crisis. It's going to be a currency crisis, not just a financial crisis. We're having a funding problem. We're issuing so much debt we can't possibly pay it back, and our creditors are figuring this out. The debt to GDP is off the charts. Our debt is now close to 90% of our GDP, but that's just a bonded debt. If you count the off-budget debt, such as the Fannie and Freddie liabilities, which are $6 trillion. You count other unfunded liabilities, the debt that the government is guaranteed, student loans, credit card loans, auto loans now, and then you look at the unfunded liabilities of Medicare and Social Security. I mean, our debt is just off the charts. It's way beyond our ability to repay it, and our creditors are going to figure this out. Meantime, the national debt, which is at $12 trillion, they just increased the debt ceiling by another $2 trillion. So a year from now, it's going to be $14 trillion. That national debt is financed with T-bills, right? This is the biggest adjustable rate mortgage in the history of the world. We've got a teaser rate on that national debt. And what I think is going to happen as the dollar starts to fall, because the Chinese and because the Saudis and the Japanese, they don't want to buy our debt anymore, which is going to happen, and interest rates start to rise, and inflation really starts to pick up because the currency is falling, interest rates are going to go up. Imagine what it's going to cost us to service that national debt. What if interest rates go to 10%? What does that mean? Well, what's 10% of $14 trillion? That's $1.5 trillion. Where's the government going to get $1.5 trillion to pay the interest on the national debt? To China, to Japan. The only chance we have of getting it is if Ben Bernanke prints it. And then if we do that, well, then it's all over. Then we have hyperinflation. Then the dollar is completely wiped out. And then we have a real serious problem on our hands because we wiped out the savings of the entire country. We need to avoid that. We need to bring sense to Washington, fiscal sanity right now. We need someone in Washington to understand that the government is the source of our problems, that we can't stimulate the economy by growing government. If we grow government, we're going to stifle the economy. We're going to sedate the economy. People think that we need this government spending, right, to get out of this crisis. And if we just spend money now, that we'll be able to pay back the debt later because the money we're borrowing and spending now is going to cause the economy to grow. It's not. The reason the economy can't grow is because the government is spending. And what we don't want to encourage is more consumption, more borrowing. That's the last thing we want. We didn't want that cash for clunkers bill. We didn't want Americans buying new cars. We can't even afford the cars we already own. Why would we borrow money to buy more? Americans have to stop buying cars, probably for years. We got to drive the cars we got now until the engines fall out because we are broke.
Hear that, Leo?
Yeah. We can't encourage people to buy houses. We've got to encourage people to save their money. We have to work. We have to invest. We have to produce our way. Right? You don't borrow your way out of debt. But we got to save our way out. We got to work our way out of this. Everybody's got to cut back, especially the federal government. Instead of increasing government spending, we actually need to cut it. And I know most of the Keynesians out there, this is heresy, right? The Keynesians say, well, the government has to stimulate. Keynes was an idiot. Either that, he was just playing a joke on everybody because his theories are completely wrong. What we need the government to do is shrink, right? We're in trouble. Government is a burden, right? We have to support government. If we're in a gigantic hole, how are we going to get out of it with the government standing on the shovels? So we need to shrink government. The government has to cut all sorts of spending. We need to abolish entire departments, agencies. We need to reduce the head count. We got to cut salaries. You know, government workers are now earning twice what the average private sector worker earns. Why? How can we pay our employees twice what we earn ourselves? It doesn't make any sense. We need massive cuts. You've got to tackle these entitlements, which means cutting the benefits. We don't have the money. The government has been writing checks that the taxpayers can't cash. We have to acknowledge that. We cannot afford these generous benefits from pensions that aren't funded. There is no money there. So we have to make serious cuts and reforms in that program now. We can't wait. And we have to repeal all the rules and regulations that are stifling economic growth. I mean, I experienced this in my own business. And I employ 7 people. I have about 100 employees. 7 of them do nothing but comply with government regulations. I don't even need these people. They do nothing to help the firm. In fact, these 7 people make everybody else less productive. And if I didn't have these 7 people, maybe I'd have 200 employees right now. But it's all the complications and the costs of the government regulation. And the government regulation is so complicated, my legal bills now are more than I used to earn not too long ago. You know, just in my annual legal bills to keep me compliant with all these rules, because these 7 guys aren't enough. So we've got to start repealing all these regulations that make the U.S. economy so uncompetitive and such an unattractive place to invest. And if we cut enough government spending, then we can reduce taxes. You know, a lot of people that run for the Republican Party, they always want to promise tax cuts. Well, how are you going to have tax cuts with a $1.6 trillion budget deficit? How can you cut taxes? You know, if you cut taxes, you just increase the deficit, and deficits do more damage to the economy than taxes. Because when the government has to borrow money, 100% of that money comes out of capital. It comes out of money that otherwise would have been loaned to a business for productive purposes. So it's worse. It's worse than taxing is borrowing. And not only that, when the government borrows money and spends it, we have to pay interest. So whatever the taxes that we don't have to pay today, we have to pay even more taxes tomorrow because of the interest that we have. So before we can have any kind of tax cuts, we need to slash government. But we need to really cut. Remember, we have to cut it in half just to get back to where it was 10 years ago. So we need more than that. So we need people in Washington who are not concerned about the political consequences and who are willing to take on the special interest groups that are receiving government checks, because it has to stop. And we have to send somebody to Washington that doesn't care if he gets reelected. And that's me. I only want 1 term. Now, I don't even really want the first term. I just as soon stay in the private sector. The reason I want to get elected is because none of the career politicians are going to do the right thing. Because for them, the right thing is getting reelected. And you can't get reelected doing what needs to be done. I mean, maybe it's possible, but you can't be concerned. You can't take a poll and decide what you want to do. A lot of people are going to be pissed off when we do the right thing. But you know what? The country is going to improve. If we keep sacrificing long-term gain or long-term pain for short-term gain, that's how we got into this mess, right? If we would have bitten the bullet and had a deeper recession in 2001 and 2002, we wouldn't be in this mess. I wouldn't be standing here. But we didn't do it. We took the easy way out. We're doing the same thing again. But the stakes are now much too high. Right? The economy is in such bad shape right now. Right? After a gigantic spending binge, right? We spent trillions of dollars that we didn't have to buy stuff we couldn't afford. We are broke. Dead broke. We can't make this mistake again. We can't afford another 2 or 3 years of this reckless monetary and fiscal policy. It has to come to an end, and it has to come to an end now. And if I get to the U.S. Senate, that's what's going to happen. You know, they don't listen to me as a private citizen. Nobody listens to me, despite the fact that I predicted a lot of this stuff. You know, they had a hearing in Washington trying to figure out why there was a financial crisis. Now, they had all these witnesses, and I called them up, I emailed them. I wanted to be a witness. I mean, after all, I predicted the financial crisis. You think they'd want to hear from me? In fact, I was just prepared to just let them get copies of my book. It would have saved them a lot of money. They could have read that book, and they wouldn't know exactly why there was a financial crisis. Yet, they wouldn't call me. They wouldn't let me testify. Instead, they had all the people testifying that got it completely wrong. The people that were saying that it was impossible to happen, or the people that were actually involved in helping to bring the crisis about, they're the guys they wanted to talk to. Because they didn't want to hear the actual truth. They're just looking for reasons to increase the size of government. They want to blame the collapse on a failure of capitalism, on an absence of regulation, so they can regulate more. And they don't understand that the regulation was the source of the problem. You know, whenever I'm doing these debates and I talk about we need deregulation,